This is a PowerPoint on Paul Tillich. And first we'll have an introduction to Paul Tillich. I'll tell you a little bit about him, and then we'll move into dynamics of faith. Hopefully you'll be able to get a good introduction to him so that when we come to class and actually have some time to meet, we'll have a more productive time. Paul Tillich was born on August 20th in 1886. That makes him a Leo. Leos are well known for wanting to be the center of attention, wanting to have a lot of play, and having a lot of charisma. Paul Tillich died in 1965. Tillich was born in a part of Germany, it was then Germany, called Brandenburg, but it is now part of Poland. He is now buried, parts of him, he was cremated, so part of his cremains are buried in New Harmony in Indiana. I don't know if anybody has been to New Harmony, Indiana. It became a community, a art colony that was also a kind of utopic community. And many of the people that Tillich knew also lived there and had him come there often. There's a cathedral without a roof. It's an outside cathedral, really. And there is a forest there that is memorial for Paul Tillich. In the forest, it's a small forest. In the forest, there's a little path you can walk. And there are stones that have some of his important quotes on them, as well as his gravestone. His father was a Lutheran pastor, and that makes him a PK. So you all know that being a PK, like me and some other folks, you might know some PKs, we make good theologians because we rebel often. Some of us rebel in theological ways, like I did. Others rebel in other ways. Tillich also served as a chaplain in World War I. And when he was serving as a chaplain in World War I, he had quite intense experiences, as you might imagine. And I think before his experiences in World War I, he was quite conservative theologically. But those experiences in war and watching the people as they suffered and found a lack of meaning had quite an impact on him. He found meaning and meaninglessness to be a primary question and issue that he continued to explore and be vexed by. Meaninglessness to him was the opposite of faith. Meaninglessness, the opposite of hope. Meaninglessness, despair. So after that experience, he had quite the crisis of faith, and he returned home. He had some issues happening in his personal life, but he continued to teach theology in various universities in Germany and in the United States. And one of the important ones that he taught at, for a story that we'll share later on in the course, is that he taught at Dresden. You might think about what happened to Dresden during the war. He also taught at Harvard Divinity School and Chicago later on in his life when he was really starting to retire. But before he came to the United States, he was an outspoken critic of Hitler and of National Socialism and any kind of fascism. You'll see that impact on what he has to say about faith in particular, and of course what he has to say about religious symbols, preliminary concerns versus ultimate concerns. And keep that in mind, his anti-fascism, his control, or his being worried about the control that fascism has over people's minds and hearts. He was dismissed from his post in 1933 when Hitler came to power. Reinhold Niebuhr, a well-known theologian then, as he is still well-known today, although he's passed a long time ago actually, went to Germany and compelled Tillich to come escape from Germany before it was too late and come and teach at Union. All of the faculty at the theological school at Union, seminary at Union, took a cut in pay so that there would be salary for Tillich. And this was not a time of great, oh, we got lots of money, let's go ahead and take some of it. And this was an act of love and concern. I've studied Tillich for many years. Certainly I studied him in graduate school with Jack Verheiden, who was a wonderful teacher. But my first experience, my first teacher of Tillich was my mother, Reverend Jacqueline Russell. She was very influenced by his thought and by his personality. She had the good fortune of studying with him when she was in divinity school, and she just really kind of adored him. She has some great stories, and she shared many of those with me, and I'll be sharing some of those throughout the course. I also studied Tillich with Jack Verheiden at Claremont, and Jack Verheiden had also studied with Tillich at Harvard, and he has some great stories as well, and he certainly had some great insights to understanding Tillich's thought and what drove Tillich's ultimate concern, what drove his theology, what drove his articulation, what ideas, what experiences were so important to him. And I've also had the good fortune of engaging with Clark Williamson, who also studied with Tillich. Clark Williamson studied with Tillich when Clark was in graduate school at Chicago, and he was the Englisher for Tillich's third volume of systematic theology, which meant he didn't really translate it from Germany, but he tried to make the German English that Tillich spoke and wrote in sound a little more like English. Anyone who's read a German thinker knows that their sentences are long and their verb is at the end. So Clark worked to make that volume more understandable to an English audience. So he clearly understood and worked very closely with Tillich. And Clark also has some great stories about Tillich. So I have had the blessing to have three very different perspectives on Tillich from people who knew him. Some knew him very well, and I have enjoyed seeing these different perspectives, seeing and learning from them. It's like I'm a grand student of Tillich, and now you will be a great grand student of Tillich. Tillich was one of the most influential theologians of the 20th century. Many folks might call him a liberal existentialist, but he's more than an existentialist. Some folks called him an idealist. In some ways, his thought fits idealism, the notion of having ideals, the notion of focusing on ideas as what are real and what can actually change the world. Others might know him as a socialist. He certainly was a socialist when he was in Germany, when he was opposing the Nazis, when he was opposing fascism. Others might talk about him as a rationalist. He has an important place for reason and rationality, but he's not limited to that. Others may even see strains of romanticism in him. Not romantic like, oh, he sent me flowers on Valentine's Day. Now, romantic more in the tradition of Schleiermacher and the importance of experience, religious experience. For Tillich finds the experience of the holy the most important element to motivate people, to ground people in what's really real. He also focuses on the experience of living life in the ambiguities of existence, which then brings us back to being an existentialist. An existentialist meaning two things. An existentialist means that he's concerned about the structure of existence and finds that the structure of existence provides the format, the lens through which we look at the problems and the questions of life that each person faces. But also existentialist means that it is not an essence of human soul that is prior to existence. That we don't have an essence and you go down into the world, and then that essence gets corrupted, and then you have to get back to that essence. And that's what's really real, not your experience here in existence. No, for Tillich, existence is really real, and your experience in existence, and what you learn and what you don't learn, how you are changed, how you grow, that's important to him. And in terms of labels, one last thing is that Tillich himself would call himself an ecstatic naturalist. Now, naturalists are differentiated between supernaturalists and naturalists. Supernaturalists are going to note that God comes in with a supernatural power and changes the world, changes it, interrupts it, or intervenes at certain times, and can easily and with glee violate the laws of nature. A naturalist would suggest that actually we know God from knowing nature, from knowing, not only knowing nature, but we certainly know something from knowing nature, that God is present in the very structures of the world and the universe, not just nature like the cardinal that just peeped or the trees, but nature in terms of the laws of nature, the laws of physics, the way that we experience the world, that God is present in that, according to Tillich. And it brings us out of that as well. It brings us beyond that. God is there, but God is more. He would call this ecstatic naturalism. Those of you who are familiar with process theology and Whitehead might call it panentheism. But we'll talk about panentheism at another time. Tillich is a philosopher and a theologian. He really isn't a philosopher. He's more of a religious thinker, because he uses philosophy. You might get from what I'm saying here is that Tillich does not fit in one category exclusively. In fact, one of the books written by him and other books written about him are called On the Boundary. Tillich is always on the boundary. He's on the boundary, trying to learn from one side and speak to the other side, and then learn from that side and speak to that side, the first side. This correlation that we find with Tillich, the method of correlation, which we'll talk about later when we move into systematic theology, his method of correlation, of asking questions of the experience that people are having, of the actual situation that we're living in. What are those primary questions? For him, those are existential questions. And then the answers, finding the answers. The theologian discerns the answers in the Christian message, discerns the message and understands the message, and is able to articulate it in such a way that it can make sense to answer those deep existential questions, those deep questions of meaning or reality or grace. So Tillich uses his philosophical analysis in this way in order to try to make the Christian symbol system and the Christian values make sense, be valuable, be meaningful to the people in our in his context, but now we could use a Tillichian method to look at our context, to look at our situation. How can we live as contemporary Christians, as Christians in this contemporary world? This is what Tillich hopes that he can help articulate in his use of philosophy to understand the situation. And he doesn't just use philosophy, he uses art and science as well. And then his clear knowledge and wisdom that comes from the Christian tradition, and his understanding of the way symbols operate, to create a theology that is meaningful and effective in contemporary world. This is my favorite picture of Tillich. I love the way he jumps. It does seem like he's an ecstatic naturalist in this picture, doesn't he? And he's happy too with all of his books in the background. I guess he's been doing some yoga. I will talk about Tillich in general with greater detail later on. But let's move into the discussion of this text, the dynamics of faith. Before we do that, I want you to reflect upon what you believe faith to be. What is faith? How would you define faith? If you were at a church gathering, maybe even a adult forum, and people started asking questions, what is faith? What kind of definitions would you come up with? I'm going to ask you to actually reflect upon this. You don't have to stop right now, but you can, and write down what's a definition of faith. And maybe post about this later on. This might be one of the things that you can post about in this week before we meet together, and respond to other posts. Now that you've written down what you think faith is, let's take a look at what Tillich thinks. I have two different books. They're the same book. This is, I don't know what yours looks like. This is what my first one looked like. The Dynamics of Faith. For Tillich, faith is being grasped by ultimate concern. Faith is ultimate concern. Now, this might be confusing, because what do we mean by ultimate? You might think about what you mean by ultimate. How do you understand ultimate? I understand ultimate as that which is beyond our immediate experience of every day. It is something that's transcendent. It's also that which is highest. The ultimate purpose of seminary is, on the one hand, to enable you to get ordained, to get a master's of divinity, which enables you to get ordained, which enables you to serve as a pastor, which enables you to fulfill your vocation. So what is the ultimate goal or the ultimate purpose? Ultimate is that which is unsurpassable, the highest, the most important, the most fundamental, the final. Ultimate goal may in fact be about love. And then what is concern? What do you mean by concern? How do you understand concern? Concern is a noun. What is your concern? But you can be concerned about things. It can be something that you're worried about, or it could be something that you're interested in. For Tillich, faith is the state of ultimate concern. It's the state of being grasped by ultimate concern. Ultimate concern is a kind of energy, a kind of experience. You're grasped. You become concerned about something. You become worried. You become interested. Your attention is riveted. It grasps you. This is part of his way of understanding how knowledge works here also, is that we are not simply uninvolved observers that observe objects that are unaffected and unaffecting. Now, for Tillich, reality and the person who's observing actually are connected. When I observe something, I'm also grasped by it. This is interesting. Think about it, particularly if we think about Heisenberg and his principle, not about Schrodinger's cat necessarily, but there is that sense of uncertainty, and the uncertainty comes from the fact that we don't know how something is affected in this moment because our observing it has affected it. So I can observe something, but my very observation of it affects it. You've seen this in social and psychological experiments, but we also see it, which makes sense, right? Makes sense. If I observe you, you're actually thinking differently about what you're doing because you know I'm observing you. But this also is the fact the scientists tell us, the physicists tell us, even when we're observing an electron. Something you wouldn't think is noticing that we're observing it, especially since we're looking through funky microscopes. Anyway, so faith is the state of being grasped by ultimate concern. And as such, it asks for and it demands total surrender. You are pulled, your total attention is taken. And it is an action of the whole person. You can't just use one element, say, oh, I have faith in my thinking, or I have faith in my actions, but I don't really believe anything. It's an action of the whole. Faith as ultimate concern is another way of talking about, philosophical way of talking about, or as Tillich would say, the most non-symbolic way we can talk about faith is to say it's ultimate concern. The symbolic way, which we'll get to in a moment, is very powerful, is to talk about the Great Commandment. What's the Great Commandment? Well, it's written here so you can see, but I'm hoping you know what the Great Commandment is: to love God with all yourself, with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your might. It sounds like ultimate concern. To love God, to be captured by God, allow oneself to be captured by one's concern for God, by one's attention to God, being wrapped in either a mystic rapture, an ecstatic experience. Use that word again, ecstatic. Tillich being an ecstatic naturalist. Ecstatic meaning something that comes out of. Ecstatic is you're pushed out of and beyond. Secondly, his definition of ultimate concern, his definition of faith as ultimate concern, is both subjective and objective. Hang on. Come here. Sorry, there's a squirrel after my bird. So his definition of faith as ultimate concern is both subjective and objective. Being concerned about that which is ultimate. Being concerned. I am being concerned about something that's ultimate, that's out there, that's beyond right now. That's part of ultimate. That's a noun. That's when the ultimate is a noun. And secondly, ultimate can also be a qualifier of my concern. It can mean that this concern that I have is the most important one that I have. So my concern, faith is about my concern. What am I concerned about? What is my preliminary concern? Is God my preliminary concern, or is God the concern I have that's most important? Is following Christ, is that a preliminary concern, or is that, sorry, got a squirrel coming after us. Is that a preliminary concern, or is it my ultimate concern? Is it my most important concern? So now you see that ultimate concern can mean that I am most concerned. My ultimate concern is about that which is ultimate, beyond me. So Tillich uses this term ultimate concern because it reflects a subjective and objective way of talking about faith, and it expresses that both of these are the case in every moment, really. It's not just looking at it differently, but it's actually saying we are connected by the fact that I am most concerned about that which is ultimate. I'm actually connected to God. So faith is this almost like a tractor beam that pulls us toward God because of our ultimate concern, this thing that's most important to us. Just as a review here, ultimate concern is both a concern about that which is ultimate, boundless, beyond, and it is my concern that is the concern that I have that is most important to me. It's beyond any other concern. As we move into thinking about what does it mean to have faith, we're going to talk about the human system. How Tillich understands the human system. He mentions this, but he doesn't develop it very much. So for Tillich, there are 3 dimensions, and I would actually add a 4th dimension. The first one is a mental or cognitive dimension. This is a dimension, we're talking about human, what does it mean to be human? Mental or cognitive. What part of faith might be part of that? Secondly, emotional dimension, the things that make us feel what we feel, the things that bring us emotional connection, bondedness. And third, will, or not vocation, but volition. What is it I want to do? What is it I'm willing myself to do? This is kind of action, but it's prior to action. It's also where courage comes from, our will. I would add the dimension of actions and physicality. We have a physicality not just about our actions, but also about our whole body, how we feel in our body, what we do with our body. Which dimension do you think is primary in faith? And I'm going to ask you to think about that. Maybe even highlight one of them. Like, is it this one? How does this work? Whoop! Is it that one? Is it that one? How about that one? What do you think? So this is my chart to try to talk about the way that I think these different human dimensions of the human self or the human system are connected. So there's mind, heart, body and actions, and will. And I think when they come together, and Tillich thinks this, and then I agree with him, that's what spirit is. Spirit is when they come together. Now this drawing actually should have things be bigger. I couldn't find one that was bigger because I think they're all kind of interrelated and they act together, so the circles would actually be bigger here. Oh no, they're fading. Okay, but you get the idea, right? Okay. Where's faith? And here's the answer. All of them. Faith is primary in all of them, not when they're separate. Here's the thing for Tillich, is that he thinks that many of the distortions of faith, when we get to what faith is not, are tending to one dimension over the other. He thinks the mental dimension or the cognitive dimension, which is about knowledge, is the most common distortion of faith. That faith gets associated with belief, or not just associated with belief, but identified with belief. And then it loses our understanding of the other dimensions. You can see people who might say, I have faith, I believe in God. Tillich would say that is a distortion. Or people who might say, I believe in God the Father, the Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus the Christ. All of those are not unimportant claims about what you believe, but should not be confused with having faith. Emotion, we can distort faith by saying how we feel and limiting our faith or our relationship with God to simply how you feel around when you go to church, or how you doing things only that make you feel good, or how you feel when you're singing the hymns. Not that those aren't important, but they're not the faith should not be identified only with those. It also could be related to will. Now this is often when people get ethics and religion mixed up, as if, not that there isn't an ethical dimension in religion or in faith. Certainly it's about what we do as well, but it's not limited to what we do. It has something to do with why we do it and how that affects and changes who we are. So religion is not simply about, here are good things to do, here are the ethical rules. It's more than that. And I would add, as I said, I would add the physical, the interconnectedness of the body. And not only our actions in our practice of living and maybe making different motions in ritual, but also just our physicality, our very physicality. Which dimension is primary? All of them. And when they come together, as I showed in the previous slide, those different dimensions all come together. When they come together, then we are acting in spirit. Faith, ultimate concern, has these effects. It centers the person. It centers our human system. It brings together all the dimensions of the self and personality. And it is an act of the total personality. It centers us all. It grounds us. It brings us together so that we act out of our spirit, which includes our cognitive mental functioning, our knowledge, our thought. It also includes our emotions, our emotional connections, our feelings, our passions, and it includes our will, our beliefs about what's true, what's good, what's right, how we make those decisions. How do you decide what to do when you're in an ethical situation, doing the right thing? And it also is about our body and engaging everything together. When we do that, then it's an act of the spirit. Secondly, faith is also about bringing us beyond. It brings us beyond the self. It transcends all of us, all the different elements, and pulls us out of ourselves, beyond ourselves, in a connection with that which is divine, and in a connection with other people in our community, with their connection with the divine. Faith is about transcending, and transcending transforms us toward that which is beyond. Faith affects all parts of our personality and our self. It affects all those parts of the self, and it transcends not only the dimensions, not only the differences between the dimensions of the self, but it also just transcends the splits between the subject and the object. It transcends the split between the subject and the object. What it is I, as a subject, experience, and that which is external to my experience that I'm actually experiencing. We often see a split between the subjective and the objective. Faith transcends that split. It also transcends the split between the conscious and the unconscious. What are you conscious of in what you're doing? Do you ever do things that you're not conscious of? Do you ever say things and you're not conscious of the reason why you said them? Do you believe things that you're not fully conscious of what the implications of those things are? Are there unconscious or unspoken dimensions of your group experience? Faith brings these things together, transcending the split. It also transcends the split between the rational and the non-rational. Often we think this is rational and good, that's not rational. Not necessarily the irrational, but the non-rational. We have experiences that are not limited to reason and rationality. We can't explain things with a rational argument. This faith also transcends any split between the cognitive and the emotion or will. Hang on. Come here. Squirrel's back. Sorry. Between the cognitive, what we know, and what we feel. It transcends that split. So we have an experience of knowing something with an emotional depth. We have an experience of feeling clearly and knowing clearly, and acting clearly, and believing clearly. It also transcends the split between our personal and our cultural values. Here's another way of thinking about the self in terms of the way that Tillich thinks about it. Mind and thought is one dimension, passion and will is another dimension, and emotion is a third dimension. And the three of them come together to make a person. Clearly there's a body there too somewhere, and my argument is they all come together. Where's that little pencil? They all come together and make a spirit. So that's the spiritual dimension, is when they're all coming together. And the spiritual dimension is beyond them all coming together. It includes something else also. So when these three dimensions come together and act in an integrous way, in an integrated way, that occurs in faith. It may occur in other experiences as well. Tillich makes a distinction, a big distinction, between faith and belief. Faith, on the one hand, is an act of the whole person. It includes the emotion, in the volition, the will, power, the cognitive, and the physical. It also transcends all these dimensions of the human person. Belief, on the other hand, is limited. Belief is about knowledge. It's when you think that something is true, but you probably have a low degree of evidence. I think X, Y, and Z is true, but I can't be certain. That's what belief means. I believe the sun will come out later on this afternoon. I believe it's not going to rain. I believe I am going to run into somebody I know here at Starbucks. I'm not at Starbucks, but if I were. I believe that a good candidate will win the presidency. You could believe something that has a high degree of evidence, but you still aren't certain. You still can't be certain. And so you're saying, this is what I think could be the case, or will most likely be the case. That's what belief is meaning. Belief, because it is limited to one dimension of the human self or the human system, cannot transcend this polarity of the cognitive and emotional functions. It does not transcend these different polarities or these different splits. Tillich has a chapter on what faith is not, and he lists three things in particular, and each of them corresponds to the dimension of what it means to be the human self. The first one is the intellectual distortion of faith. This is when one thinks something is true but isn't sure. This is belief and not faith. This is a cognitive claim. This is not a claim of the whole person. Faith is also more than trust. It includes trust and it includes belief, but it is not equal to trust. Faith is also not simply about what one feels in one's experience of the holy. Faith is more than that. Faith is also not will. It's not simply ethical belief, ethical behavior, nor is it willpower. It cannot be distorted by being reduced to one of these 3 or 4 dimensions of what it means to be a person. The book is called Dynamics of Faith because it is dynamic. It's not simply static. Faith is not a static reality. It is something that's changing, and it's something that changes us. There's a dynamism in our faith. There is something that gets us going. Faith gets us going. Because faith is not simply my relationship to an object that's not changing. Faith is relational at its core. It's relational to me. I'm related to myself. These dimensions, they're not static either. The spirit, my spirit, that brings together all these different dimensions is constantly moving. I am moving, not just by walking, but my emotions, my thoughts, my will, my sense of right and wrong, my movement, my experience of my body, all of that is changing. There's a dynamism, there's a vibration at my core. And faith is at that core as well. Faith engages all of those dimensions, and it brings us outside beyond those. So it's not to be confused with belief, which is knowledge, which we've already gone over. Faith is also being grasped by ultimate concern. And ultimate concern is something that results from an encounter with the holy. And this encounter with the holy centers us and brings us beyond ourselves. Because faith is understood as a daimonism, as a relational notion in which I am related to myself, I'm related to others around me, I'm related to my past, my future, their future, our present. I'm also related to the holy. Faith cannot be expressed in direct language. It must be expressed in symbolic language. So religious language must be symbolic. And we're going to talk about symbols in more detail later. But let's note two things that are particularly important about symbols before we get excited. First, symbols point beyond themselves, like signs. You know, signs like a stop sign or a sign that says speed limit is 45, or even words can be signs. Both symbols and signs point beyond themselves, but only symbols participate in that to which they point. By participating in the symbol, we're actually participating in that which transcends the symbol. So the symbol, in a sense, is a part of what it participates. It enables us to become a part of that which it points to. Now, symbolic language then, thus, is much more complex and more powerful than regular language, than direct language, or even poetic language. We'll come back to symbols and we'll talk about those in a moment. As a review, what faith is not, it's not knowledge, but reason is necessary to faith. Faith is not to be confused with a claim that some particular belief is absolutely true. That's something that makes him upset. Faith is not the opposite of doubt. Faith is not the opposite of doubt. The certainty of faith is existential. It's not intellectual. The certainty of faith being existential means that a person risks one's whole being in this investment that one has with God, this investment in being related to that which is ultimate. Faith is also not preliminary. If you have faith in something that's preliminary, you're in trouble. Faith and the dynamics of the holy. That which concerns us ultimately becomes holy to us. If it becomes holy to me, but usually this happens in a group. That which concerns a group or a community ultimately can become holy for that group, and it can have the same kind of effect and empower it in terms of power upon that group and upon that group's behavior and beliefs and feelings. That which concerns us ultimately becomes holy. Now, becoming holy does not necessarily mean it becomes godlike in the sense of it is good, but it plays the same role that God ought to play in centering oneself and in having power over the individual, and really having power even beyond your individual will internally, your will internally. So it can affect you in ways that you're not saying, oh yeah, I want to be affected that way. You can, addiction is a great example of this. You become ultimately concerned about the next drink or the next hit, or I'm not sure what they're called, but you all know what they are, thing with the crack or something. If you become ultimately concerned about that, become addicted to it, that's all you think about, you're concerned about, that's your most important concern, then it plays the same role that God should. And it becomes all-powerful for you. You sacrifice, you change things, you do things you ordinarily wouldn't do in order to get that, in order to be connected to it. The holy itself, according to Tillich, is not only creative, but can be destructive as well. Tillich uses a phenomenological approach to understanding the holy. He takes what Rudolf Otto calls as the holy. And Rudolf Otto talks about three elements: mysterium, fascinans et tremendum. That's Latin for that which is mysterious, that which is powerfully mysterious, that which fascinates us. It inspires fascination. We get fascinated by something. We are just awestruck by it. And it's tremendous. It makes us tremble. It can be terrifying. There are many stories, even if you haven't had an experience of the holy that was terrifying to you. There are many experiences described in the biblical text and in the Christian tradition of people encountering that which is holy and being quite terrified. Think of the burning bush. How might you respond to that burning bush? Think of the disciples being terrified by Jesus when he calms the sea. Think of an experience you might have had of the holy. A religious experience, could be an experience in nature or in church. Did it have these elements? Mysteriousness, fascination. You can't keep your eyes off of it. You become very interested in it. And tremendum, overwhelming, tremendous. Secondly, idolatry is what happens when we make something sacred that actually isn't sacred. When we take something that's actually preliminary and make it our ultimate concern. This is a risk that can happen in faith because we don't know the doubt in faith, which we'll get to in a minute, is that what we have named as ultimate might actually not be ultimate. What we've experienced as ultimate might not actually be ultimate. Now, there are ways in which we can use our reason and our experience and our will to make idolatry less likely to happen. We can note, oh, I seem to be becoming more and more interested in making my decisions based on how well I'm doing in this class than what is most holy. Or, more likely, on what's going to get me the most money at this situation, or what's going to be the easiest to do. Do I make the decision based on that? Do we make a decision based on what's best for us? What's easiest for us? Making what is sacred, that which we think is sacred, into something that is sacred that actually isn't sacred. That's idolatry. We become idolatrous when we absolutize claims, religious claims. Perhaps one might absolutize, I know what God thinks about homosexuality. I know that God thinks that gay people shouldn't get married, and I'm going to absolutize that claim because there's something written in Leviticus, and I'm going to absolutize the Bible. I'm going to absolutize the words that someone wrote down in an encounter with the divine, and I'm going to make that which is holy, as opposed to the ultimate, which is beyond that, behind that, above it. Doubt, then, is an important element in faith. It helps us avoid idolatry. Can you think of experiences that you've had of your own idolatry, or experiences that you might note in our world that might sound like those could be idolatry? One of the ways to forestall that idolatry is to include doubt as part of our experience of faith, knowing that doubt is an element of faith. Faith includes risk, it includes doubt, and it definitely includes courage. ultimate concern risks being wrong. If you were certain, there would, without any doubt, there would be no concern. You wouldn't be that interested in it. What do you know for sure? I'm not really all that concerned about whether the sun's going to come out tomorrow, or whether the sun is going to still be there, I should say. I'm not concerned about that. It's not my ultimate concern, because I'm pretty sure it's going to come out. It's going to be there. Courage, then, is an element of faith that is the daring self-affirmation of one's own being in spite of the powers of non-being. And this is an important element both in terms of faith as we're talking about it now, but also when we read the Courage to Be, and in life. We're constantly being assaulted by the powers of non-being. Even gravity itself is a power of non-being, pushing us down as we affirm, pushing down the little sprout of the tomato plant, pushing down the crocus. But courage pushes up. We stand up. We build up. It's easy to be pushed down. It's easy to be discouraged by the powers of non-being. But we affirm being and the power of being and the expression of the power of being through us, in us, and with each other. Now, another element of doubt . I apologize for my technology issues. There's supposed to be another slide in here that talks about doubt as an element of faith, and I'm not sure where it went. So I'm just going to tell you what Tillich says, that doubt is an element of faith, and it's an important element of faith because it's what keeps us from making preliminary concerns and holding them up as ultimate and then acting as if we are absolutely correct. It's, for him, an important element in helping us avoid fascism, a fascism of religion or a fascism of country or nationalism. We have an element of doubt that we might be wrong. The doubt is not in God. The doubt is in our understanding. Did we understand that correct? Are we naming that correct? Is that what we've discerned that God wants us to do? Is that the most valuable option? That's the doubt. I could be wrong. But often we are not in a situation where we can know for sure. Certainly not about faith. We have an experience, perhaps a very intense experience that we know in our heart. And that, for Tillich, is good. We know in our heart. We act out of that. We have the courage to act out of it. But we also have the courage to say, on the other hand, I could be wrong, and I don't want to risk other people's lives. I don't want to destroy other people based on my affirmation that I am correct. So now back to this slide. Are these religious symbols or signs? We have bread, a loaf of bread, a glass of wine, and a head of Tillich. This head of Tillich is actually a statue that is in New Harmony, and I took this picture when I was there. It's hollow on the other side, so you can actually put your face inside Tillich's head. Is that a symbol? Is that a sign? Am I participating in Tillich by going inside of his head? Physically? Is the bread and wine a religious symbol or a sign? Let's stop for a moment and just think about that. Religion is something that has to be expressed symbolically. It is not something that can be directly expressed adequately. Language is complicated. There's direct language. The direct language might be on the back of a mac and cheese box. It tells you what to do. Boil water. Put the macaroni in for 8 minutes. Drain the macaroni. Mix the half a cup of milk, maybe it's a quarter cup of milk, and the cheese pack. Mix it all together. Period. It's telling you exactly what it wants you to do. It's direct. There's also poetic language. Language that expresses something that can't be expressed so directly. It tries to communicate something using images and affective connotations. How do you feel when you hear these words? I could recite poetry for you, but I won't. You can think of your own favorite poem. Mine would be Annabel Lee from Edgar Allan Poe. What's yours? What does it communicate? Does it make an emotional impact upon you as well? Hymns are like this, using symbolic language. Religion and faith, since we are understanding faith as ultimate concern, it's about that which is beyond our ability to hold on to it. It grasps us. It pulls us along. It brings us out of ourselves, this ecstatic naturalism. I keep seeing Tillich jumping, leaping, with his feet 3 feet off the ground and the books in the background. Symbolic language enables us to leap because symbols participate in that to which they point. They point to something beyond themselves, and then they participate in it, and they help us participate in it. Religious icons are a great example of religious symbols. If you notice this icon, you might cover over part of it. You might look at Jesus on the right side, and who does that Jesus look like? Then you might look at Jesus on the left side, and what does that Jesus look like? Many people can see different sides of Jesus, different sides of the Christ, that engage not only Christ's mercy, but also Christ's judgment or Christ's command. An icon in general, and this is where I got the icon here, right there. An icon is created in a way that is meant to take the viewer back out of the painting and into herself. So most paintings are meant to sort of draw you into the painting and then take you out through the painting. Icons are designed to bring you in to the painting and then push you back out. Push your energy, your attention back out to yourself. In a sense, they're participating, they're engaging you in the participation of something that's beyond this painting itself, pushing you back into your own spirit, your own spirituality. One of Tillich's most important contributions in the world of religious thought is his analysis of symbols and symbolic language and its importance for theology, for religious conversation, for religious worship, and religious meaning. I would suggest that you read this short chapter, which is I think only 14 pages, many times, and think about each of the characteristics of a symbol. Not only do symbols point beyond themselves, they participate in that to which they point. They participate in it. They become a part of it. They also open us up to this dimension, this level of reality that otherwise is closed to us. They open it up, unlocking corresponding dimensions in us, in our spirit, in our mind, in our feelings, in our will, in our spirit that brings it all together, that integrates it together. It opens us up, and it opens up dimensions of reality, and it creates a wormhole between us and the ultimate. A wormhole through which we can then also participate in that reality. We are participating in Christ's body and blood in the Eucharist. And Christ is participating in us. This is the secret, I think, to how taking the communion in the community, taking that Eucharist, not only engages us with a presence of Christ's grace, and perhaps for Luther, Christ's judgment, but it enables us to become more Christ-like. One of my favorite priests, bless his soul, John Olson, used to stand here with the Eucharist. And he said two things. One, do you ever think that when I hold up the bread and I look into your eyes and I say the body of Christ, I ain't talking about the bread? Another theologian has often said, the true mystery of the Eucharist is not how the bread becomes the body of Christ, but how the imbiber becomes the body of Christ, how we become the body of Christ. That's what a symbol does. It participates in the reality to which it points, and it enables us to participate with a depth that we can't describe and explain without using symbolic language. Further, Tillich says that symbols cannot simply be created intentionally. I can't just invent them. I can't just say, I'm going to make this a symbol. This is now my symbol. This is my symbol of a dancing trio. Here's the Trinity. Here we go. Right? I can't do that. Symbols grow out of my and many others' experience that is full experience, including my unconscious as well as my conscious, and our collective experience with the divine, our encounter with the divine, our encounter and our experience, and how we respond and how we grow around that symbol. And when they are no longer bring that experience, they no longer enable us to participate, the wormhole has closed and the symbol will die. It will no longer be a symbol for us. Again, I apologize for the technology. It didn't look like this picture on my other computer. So, symbols transform us. They have the power to transform us. They are like tunnels. They are like tunnels that bring us to Christ, that bring us to the object, to which they point, and then they transform us through that encounter with the divine. They're like wormholes or tunnels. So be careful when you participate and what symbols you participate with and what concern is your ultimate concern, for you will become like it. Is this a symbol? What do you think this might be a symbol of? This is one of my favorite statues. I took this photo in Paris at, I can't remember the name of the Cluny? Maybe it's the Cluny. It has all the oldest art. This is actually, notice the Mary and Madonna and Child motif. This is actually Jesus. This is actually Jesus. Oops, that didn't work. And Mary being welcomed into heaven at her Assumption. This is meant for you to be thinking about what you might be drawing in your own symbol. You're drawing a symbol not that you've created. You can't create a symbol, but you can make a sign of a symbol. And then you can use that to engage a different part of your brain, not just your intellectual brain, not just your knowledge, reason brain, but using a different element in, drawing, maybe using colors, get some pencils, pens, get some crayons, magic markers. Is this a symbol or a sign? A symbol. Are these symbols or signs? This is a crucifix from my church, and I am carrying it. This is in a cathedral in Paris. This is outside of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which is the new chateau of the Pope. Actually, it's in Avignon, right outside of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And that is an elephant standing upside down on its trunk next to a man doing a handstand. Is this a sign or a symbol? Is this an expression of ultimate concern or preliminary concern? I think of this as a sign of money and a symbol of American freedom. Are they preliminary or ultimate? This is a sign. I think of this as a symbol. But you will have to determine whether it's a symbol or not. This is Abraham and Isaac. This is outside of Chartres in France, outside of Paris. There's a little angel here, you can't really see him, who's saying, Abraham, don't do it. See the ram? Isn't that beautiful? God, it's such a beautiful face. Myths are also symbols. They are collections of symbols brought together into a story or a sequence. We might think of any symbols or myths that we have. And this is Paul Tillich on YouTube. There are some interesting videos of him. You can hear him talk about the difference between faith and belief. And you can get to hear his nice thick accent where he talks about face. Face, which means faith, of course. So engage. There may be some other YouTube videos on Tillich as well that you might enjoy watching. And now we've come to the crowd participation portion of our program. I'd like you to draw a religious symbol and a sign. And I'd like you to share it. Maybe you can take a picture of it and post it, or bring it to our class on the 8th of July, and we can talk a little bit about what makes a religious symbol a religious symbol. So what I'd like you to do is be able to explain, or maybe even explain, here's how my symbol, my drawing of a symbol, participates in the reality to which it points. Here's how it opens a dimension, a little bit like the way I described the Eucharist. Here's how it was born, not invented, how it came out of the encounter of people in religious situation, religious experiences. So use all the different characteristics of symbols versus signs and differentiate your symbol and your sign. And I thank you for watching this PowerPoint, and we'll see you soon.